My wife mocked me at her sales dinner. How does it feel watching me succeed while you do nothing? Everyone laughed. I replied, I own 77% of this company, and you're fired. The dinner fork struck the table before I could catch it. I had not dropped it. My hand simply stopped working when my wife looked across the banquet table, with more than 40 people watching, and asked, how does it feel watching me succeed while you do nothing? She wore the polished, camera-ready smile she had perfected, since her father first gave her a sales territory and a business card carrying the family name. The room went silent for one beat. Then the laughter began. Her colleagues laughed. Her father's employees laughed. Her mother's friends from the Scottsdale Civic League laughed. Chelsea touched my arm with 2 fingers, as if she were touching something she was not sure was clean. Don't be upset, Nolan. I'm just teasing. I picked up my fork, took a slow drink of water, and met her eyes. Teasing is fun, I said. Want to hear mine? She laughed again, expecting a harmless comeback she could brush aside. I own 77% of your father's company, I said. And effective Monday morning, you're fired. Every sound at the table died. Chelsea's face did not collapse into tears. It collapsed into pure shock, the kind that strips away every practiced expression. At the head of the table, her father, Garrett Whitmore, carefully set down his champagne glass. That was the moment everything building for 3 years finally tore open. My name is Nolan Whitfield. I am 44 years old, and I build companies. I find businesses that are broken, bleeding, badly managed, or failing to become what they could be. Then I restructure them, fund them, and make them durable. It is not glamorous work. Most of it happens in spreadsheets, legal documents, conference rooms, and quiet negotiations. It has also made me more money than I will ever need and given me a confidence that people sometimes mistake for arrogance. I met Chelsea Whitmore at a charity fundraiser in Phoenix, one of those beautiful galas where almost nobody is thinking about the cause. She was 28, radiant, ambitious, and sharper than I expected. Her father owned Whitmore Realty Group, a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in Scottsdale, where Chelsea worked in a junior sales role because Garrett believed in keeping business inside the family. We dated for 2 years, married at a vineyard outside Sedona, and bought a house in Paradise Valley with a view of Camelback Mountain. For the first 4 years, our marriage was exactly what it looked like from the outside. We traveled, laughed, and built a comfortable life. Chelsea rose through her father's company. I continued working quietly behind the scenes. What nobody at that banquet knew, and what Chelsea had stopped caring enough to ask, was what my quiet work had produced. The change in her began about 3 years before the dinner. Slow changes inside a marriage rarely arrive with warning signs. They arrive as ordinary evenings, altered routines, and conversations that happen without going anywhere. Chelsea had been promoted to senior sales director and given the company's most valuable territory in Scottsdale and North Phoenix. She handled boutique hotel deals, mixed-use developments, and contracts large enough to bring serious commissions and endless client dinners. She was genuinely talented. She could read a room, understand what a buyer needed, and know exactly when to stop talking. She had earned the promotion. What she had not earned was the contempt that slowly came with it. One October night, she stood in our kitchen at 9:30 with a glass of Syrah in one hand and her phone in the other. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, she said. You don't know what I deal with every day. I asked her to explain. She looked at me, as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. Never mind. That became a pattern. Never mind. You wouldn't understand. My work is client-facing. My work is real. It is out in the world. In Chelsea's growing version of our life, I sat at a computer and moved numbers around. I did not correct her. I had never needed applause, and once you have to prove your value to your spouse, something important has already been lost. Still, while she dismissed my work, the truth kept accumulating behind her. 3 years earlier, a mutual contact had approached me about Whitmore Realty Group. Garrett was introduced not as my father-in-law, but as a businessman facing a crisis he had not admitted to his family. The company was carrying debt its revenue could not support. 2 major commercial deals had collapsed in the same quarter, and a failed renegotiation had caused the lease on its Scottsdale Boulevard office to balloon. Garrett was too proud to tell his family how close the business was to the edge. He needed a capital infusion and a restructuring partner who understood commercial real estate and had enough cash to move quickly. I had both. We negotiated for 6 weeks. I hired 2 outside attorneys and a forensic accountant to examine every contract, debt, lease term, projection, and financial record. The final deal refinanced the dangerous obligations, saved Whitmore Realty Group, and gave me a 77% controlling stake. Garrett agreed on one condition: Chelsea could not know. He said he wanted her to believe she had earned her position on her own merits. He did not want her confidence damaged by knowing her husband was technically her boss. I respected that and agreed. My ownership was placed under a holding company called Fieldstone Capital Partners, which Garrett described as a silent investor. Chelsea never asked who stood behind it. She was busy closing deals and becoming, by any fair measure, the company's best salesperson. Somewhere in that success, she began to believe she had done everything alone. The change showed itself in pieces. At a December conference in Tempe, Chelsea finished second in the company's internal sales competition. She called from the hotel bar, thrilled. "Second place, Nolan. Can you believe it? I almost won the whole thing." I told her it was incredible and that I was proud. She heard something missing. "You sound surprised." I said I was not. Then she told me I should be more enthusiastic about what she was accomplishing. "You're so wrapped up in whatever it is you do all day that you've stopped paying attention to anything real." I let it pass. In February, Garrett hosted dinner at their home in Fountain Hills and toasted a mixed-use property in Kierland that Chelsea had closed after 6 months of negotiations. It was a legitimate win, and everyone applauded. Then Chelsea looked at me and said, "Nolan thinks real estate is too unpredictable. He prefers to play it safe." Her mother laughed. Her uncle laughed. Garrett did not. He raised his glass toward me with a careful look because he knew what I knew. Neither of us said anything. In April, I was reviewing documents at the kitchen table when Chelsea returned from brunch with colleagues. She glanced at the files and said, "Still doing your homework?" Then she walked away without waiting for an answer. I kept blaming stress and ambition. I told myself she would level out. She never did. By the first week of June, Chelsea had won Whitmore Realty Group's Top Salesperson of the Year award. She had led since the third quarter and deserved it. The dinner was held at a private venue off Pinnacle Peak Road in North Scottsdale, with exposed timber, warm lighting, and the expensive version of rustic charm. 43 people attended, including employees, spouses, Garrett and Diane, several long-standing clients, and me. Chelsea spent the week preparing. She bought a deep emerald dress and scheduled hair appointments for Thursday and Friday. From the salon, she texted, "Tonight's going to be a big night for me. Try to keep up." I wore the charcoal suit I had bought in Chicago 2 years earlier. I drove us there, ordered the sea bass, listened to the speeches, and applauded when Garrett announced her name. I watched my wife accept the award with the composure of someone who had never doubted she belonged there. She was dazzling. I saw her talent clearly, and I knew she had earned the moment. At the same time, I felt something close to grief for what had happened beneath the polished surface of our marriage. Chelsea returned to the table. The applause faded. Dessert arrived. She lifted her champagne glass, turned toward me, and asked, "How does it feel watching me succeed while you do nothing?" Much of the laughter was nervous, the automatic sound people make when a joke lands badly and nobody knows how to respond. Chelsea kept smiling. She touched my arm and told me not to be upset because she was only teasing. For 1 or 2 heartbeats, I said nothing. I thought about 3 years of silence. I thought about watching the woman I loved decide that I was background noise, that restraint meant weakness, and that my refusal to advertise myself meant there was nothing worth seeing. I thought about the attorney calls, financial reviews, quarterly reports, and capital decisions that had kept her father's company alive, all invisible because I had agreed to keep them that way. Then I looked at Garrett, the man who had signed away control of the company in a Tempe law office to prevent it from collapsing. Chelsea had offered the room a joke. I decided it needed a punchline. "Teasing is fun," I said. "Want to hear mine?" Chelsea laughed. "Sure, Nolan, let's hear it." I looked directly at her. "I own 77% of your father's company, and effective Monday morning, you're fired." Her laugh stopped in the middle of a breath. The senior colleague beside her stiffened. Diane put down her fork. Garrett stared into his champagne glass. Chelsea searched my face for a smirk or some sign I was matching her performance. I gave her nothing. "Nolan," she said, her voice suddenly low and raw. "What are you talking about?" I told her about Fieldstone Capital Partners and the controlling stake acquired 3 years earlier. I said her father could explain the documents. Every person at the table turned toward Garrett. Garrett finally looked up. At 62, he was a man who had built a company with his own hands, and then quietly surrendered most of it to keep it alive. He looked at his daughter, then at me. "It's true, Chelsea," he said, sounding exhausted. The next 40 minutes were not clean or satisfying. They were ugly and painfully real. Chelsea's voice rose into a register I had never heard. Diane quietly asked nearby clients to give the family privacy. 2 of Chelsea's colleagues left with expressions suggesting they wished they had never attended. Chelsea demanded to know why she had not been told. Garrett said he had made a desperate business decision and that my involvement had allowed the company to survive. She asked what 77% meant in practical terms. I told her I could approve or alter compensation, revoke employment contracts, and restructure leadership at my discretion. "You've been my boss," she said, standing beside the table while her award remained next to her champagne glass. "Technically," I answered. "For 3 years?" "Yes." She turned to Garrett. "You knew the entire time?" He placed both hands flat on the table and said he had. She stared at us. "And neither of you thought I deserved to know?" I reminded her that her father wanted her to earn her position on her own terms, so we had made sure she could. "Don't do that," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't make this about protecting me." I stayed silent because nothing I could say would help. Then she asked, "You said I'm fired. Did you mean it?" I told her I did. "Because I made one joke at dinner?" "Because you've been making the same joke for 3 years," I said. "Tonight you finally said it out loud in front of an audience." We left separately. Chelsea took an Uber. I drove the 15 minutes home to Paradise Valley with the windows down. Even at 10 at night, the desert air was warm. The house was dark when I arrived, and I sat in the driveway staring at Camelback Mountain against the sky. I was not triumphant. 11 years is a long time, and a marriage holds thousands of things unrelated to its worst moment. Vacations, private jokes, quiet Sundays, familiar routines, and small kindnesses gathered at the bottom of a shared life. The possibility of losing them did not feel like winning. It felt like opening a room that had once been warm and finding it cold. But I also knew that for 3 years, I had been disappearing inside my marriage. It happened gradually until I became a static, unimpressive background against which Chelsea could shine. That kind of erasure extracts something from a person, even when he is the one choosing silence. Maybe especially then. Chelsea came home around midnight. I was in the kitchen with water and my laptop, reviewing quarterly projections for another portfolio company. She stood in the doorway. The rage from dinner had burned into something more complicated. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. I said I had intended to leave that decision to her father because it had been his business. "It was my career," she said. I agreed. Then I told her the truth. Her career was real. The deals she closed and the clients she brought in belonged to her. I had not done that work for her. She was quiet, then asked, "Why fire me?" I closed the laptop. "Because you humiliated your husband in front of 40 people to get a laugh? Because it wasn't the first time? And because what someone says with an audience is usually what they truly believe." She looked down, then back at me. "I didn't think it would land like that." I told her I knew. That was the part that mattered. She had expected me to absorb it without consequence. The following days became a careful, excruciating negotiation. Not yet about the marriage, but about the immediate reality. Garrett called early the next morning, before Chelsea woke. He apologized for asking me to keep the ownership private and admitted he had always known the cost of that secrecy might come due. I told him he had wanted to protect his daughter. He said he always had. His voice carried the weight of a father, realizing that protection and preparation are not the same. He said Chelsea would need time. Then he carefully asked whether the termination was final. I remembered her fingers on my arm and the ease with which she had told me not to be upset. I said I would reconsider in 30 days, but she would not return on Monday. Garrett exhaled and called that fair. During the first week, Chelsea seemed to live on two levels. She moved through the house, made coffee, answered calls, and handled ordinary tasks while something enormous underneath was being dismantled and reorganized. She did not scream, flee to her parents, or call friends to perform the wounded wife. She sat with it, which showed me a strength I may have underestimated. On the fifth day, she entered my office and sat across from the desk with folded hands and a straight back, more like a client than a spouse. "I want to understand what's in those documents," she said. "The Fieldstone agreement, all of it." I turned the monitor toward her and explained the capital infusion, debt restructuring, equity distribution, and governance provisions, giving me authority over major employment and compensation decisions. She read carefully and asked specific, intelligent question. When she reached the employment section, she stopped. "You could have done this at any time." I said yes. "In 3 years, you never used it." I had not. "Why now?" "Because you made me invisible in front of 40 people," I said. And I decided I was done being invisible. She stared at the document for a long time. Then she said, "I think I've been a different person for the last few years. Maybe it was the success, the way people at the company responded to me, or the way my father talked about me. I started believing a version of myself that wasn't entirely true." I waited. The version where I did everything alone. The version where you were incidental. I told her that was exactly what had happened. She admitted it was not fair. I agreed. What happened next did not have a dramatic turning point. Real repairs rarely do. We began counseling with Dr. Patricia Hadley, who worked from a third-floor office on Scottsdale Road, overlooking the McDowell Mountains. She had a careful neutrality that prevented either of us from turning her into an ally. We sat across from each other twice a week for 4 months. I said things I had never spoken aloud. Chelsea described fears and resentments I had not known she carried. Her success had not only fed her confidence, it had also filled an emptiness in our marriage, one both of us had helped create by becoming comfortable, busy, and inattentive. She had not consciously set out to make me smaller. She had set out to matter. Somewhere along the way, those impulses became tangled. Understanding that did not excuse the dinner or the ease with which she expected me to endure it, but it showed us the damage had roots. In one session, Dr. Hadley asked what I wanted from the marriage. It took me longer than expected. For years, I had been managing, enduring, and keeping things stable without asking what I wanted stability to contain. Finally, I said, I want her to see me, not the version she decided I was, the actual person. Chelsea stayed quiet, then said, I know. I stopped looking. I think I was afraid of what I would see. Dr. Hadley asked what frightened her. Chelsea looked at me. That you were doing more than I was. I'd been measuring myself against you and telling myself I was winning. If I looked closely, I might have had to admit we weren't even playing the same game. It was one of the truest things said in 4 months. The 30 days I gave Garrett expired, and I extended the period by another 30. Our marriage was still too fragile for permanent business decisions, and I had no interest in using the company as leverage. On the 62nd day, I reinstated Chelsea's employment contract with the same title, territory, and commission structure. I added one written condition and sent it directly to her, not through Garrett. Once a month, she and I would hold a formal one-on-one review, not as husband and wife, but as controlling shareholder and senior sales director. Every metric would be visible. Every decision would be transparent. Chelsea called after receiving it. She was between client meetings at Kierland Commons, and I could hear traffic outside. Is this a punishment? She asked. I said no. It was what a real professional relationship looked like. She wanted her career to belong to her, and accountability was part of that. After a pause, she said, okay. Before hanging up, she said my name and apologized for the dinner. I had imagined that apology might feel like relief. Instead, it felt like finding ground after years in deep water. It was not a victory, only the first honest thing between us in a long time. I told her I knew. Our first monthly review happened on a Thursday afternoon at the Whitmore offices on Scottsdale Boulevard. Chelsea arrived at exactly 2 o'clock and sat across from me at the conference table. Years earlier, I had occupied a quiet seat near that same table during Garrett's client lunches, while business conversations moved around me. Now Chelsea and I reviewed her pipeline, closing ratios, and the 3 new commercial contacts she had developed since the Kierland deal. She came prepared with a formatted summary and projections for the next 2 quarters. She knew her business. She always had. When we finished, she closed her folder. How did I do? I told her she already knew. She smiled. Not the polished banquet smile, but something smaller and real. Yeah, she said, I do. Our marriage did not return to what it was before, and it should not have. Before the dinner, we had been comfortable, polite, and increasingly absent from each other. What we have now is harder and more honest. It requires us to be present instead of merely living near each other. Some Sundays we drive to the Superstition Wilderness, hike the Peralta Trail, and barely speak because silence can be peaceful when it is not hiding anything. Some evenings we sit at the kitchen table and have conversations that leave us feeling seen instead of managed. I will take that over the polished emptiness we had before. Garrett retired 8 months after the dinner. He called it his own decision, and I believed him. He had been moving toward retirement for years, and once the Fieldstone arrangement became known, a burden lifted from him. He no longer had to guard the secret. He could simply be Chelsea's father. His retirement party was smaller and quieter, held at their Fountain Hills home. Garrett spoke about work, legacy, and the things people build without knowing whether they will survive. He thanked the employees and Diane. Then he looked at me and said he was grateful to the man who had made sure there was still something to retire from. Chelsea stood beside me and took my hand without looking over. I have thought many times about the awards dinner. I do not remember it with triumph, and not only with anger. It was the hardest and most necessary thing I had done in years. Not because of what it cost Chelsea, but because of what it cost me to stop disappearing. When you choose invisibility long enough, you forget being seen was ever possible. You confuse silence with peace, smallness with humility, and absorbing every insult with being the bigger person. Then someone you love makes a joke at your expense in front of 40 people, and everything becomes clear. My greatest mistake was not simply staying silent. It was allowing that silence to teach my wife that I was not worth noticing. I am Nolan Whitfield.
Mm.
Wentioned. For 3 years, I was the majority owner of the company. My wife believed she was conquering alone. I never told her, never interfered with her achievements, and let her keep every victory because I believed that was love. In some ways, it was. But love without honesty can become a long, comfortable delay before the reckoning. Ours arrived over champagne at a banquet table with 40 witnesses. The most useful words I ever said to my wife were delivered quietly, with a glass of water in front of me, at the end of someone else's joke. Teasing is fun. Want to hear mine?